Hi, I'm Rich Sains, and this is the Procurement Conversation. In this series, I've been fortunate to speak with inspirational young procurement leaders from different sectors, roles, and regions. By sharing their stories, we want more people to hear about procurement, including the leaders of tomorrow. This week, as part of our Young Leaders series, we're talking to Nils Brauckmann, Head of Procurement at Personio. Hi, Nils.
Hey, Rich. Thank you so much for having me. Great show you have, and I'm happy to be here.
So, Nils, to start off, what do you love about procurement?
So for me, I think it's a unique mix, somewhat being a co-pilot and helping stakeholders every day, while at the same time being somewhat of a controlling function. So you want their best, right? And you try to deliver as much value as possible, but also at the same time, you try to steer them within the framework that you set. So I think it's this mixture that's really making it great for me. Plus, of course, and I think that's very unique in procurement. You're one of the few functions in a company that really have this bird's view on all things going on with company, how things are connected, what's going on everywhere. So I love just getting to know companies and just seeing the bigger picture after a few months.
Sure. How did you get into procurement and why didn't you do something else?
I think like most people, right? I slipped into procurement. It wasn't most kids don't grow up and aspire to be a procurement manager, right? I wanted to be an astronaut at some point, firefighter maybe. But up until I studied, I really didn't thought about that there are people that are into procurement or into buying. So I studied tech and entrepreneurship. It's a business study. Ended up in procurement by accident, really. There was a role open in IT procurement. I applied, I got the role, and yeah, that was how I got into procurement. Fell in love with it, stuck with it, and happy to did that.
What does a normal day look like for you?
There are very few normal days in procurement. I think every day is mostly the day starts by checking in my team, just getting an idea of what's going on, what projects are at which stage, and then obviously checking into my own projects, meeting up with stakeholders, meeting up with vendors, just moving things along. And yeah, luckily still, even though I'm in a leadership position these days, I'm still very much involved into negotiations, really moving the pieces, getting the puzzle pieces together. So luckily every day there's some sense of accomplishment for me.
Brilliant. And do you get there any downsides or frustrations with your job?
Uh, Lots, but I think the benefits heavily outweigh the downsides. I think my main point of frustration are these aborted projects. And I think every procurement professional will know these. You invest a lot of time, right? You're with your legal team, you're probably the only person in the company that really reads through hundreds of pages of contracts at time. And you redline, you review, you have dozens of calls, and in the end, the project just falls apart because of some new developments. Of course, I'm working in tech, so these things happen. But I think we're all human. So for me, it's really frustrating to just throw away all your time investment into this, even though I understand the rationale behind changing strategies.
Yeah, I get that. It can be frustrating sometimes, can't it? It's one of those things where, yeah, there's a lot going on. There's a lot. You obviously wanted to be focusing on things that actually have an outcome at the end of it. Things can change and things can change quickly. I remember working on projects where, and especially things like RFPs, where you'll be involved in the RFP and things would be changing all the way along, and it makes it really difficult to nail down the specification and nail down the requirements. And then you get to the end and it all gets canned anyway or something. You've put a load of work into it. That's not great.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes you just, like you said, right? So all the pieces come together and you think you're finally in the clear, you have a good deal put together. Everybody is happy with it. You're happy in procurement, which I think is rare that procurement, you always feel like there was just that one more thing that you could have gotten into the agreement, but you're at this stage and then all of a sudden they say, okay, we put this on hold for now. We maybe look into this, next year, in 2 years and whatnot. I think there's always a learning that comes with it. But I think in that moment or in that day or week, you're not in a good place afterwards. But that's part of the career, and I think we all learn to deal with it with time.
What are the key skills that we need in procurement?
Depends. I think what sort of procurement. I mean, it's not equaling procurement. I think there are a lot of nuances to it. What I learned for the path that I chose, so for the path that I'm on right now, I think most of all, it's outside of the box thinking.
Mm,
Because in the end, in procurement, what puts you apart from a lot of other people in the company is that you understand that a contract is flexible and a contract is something to play with, or a deal is something to play with. You can pick apart a business model, you can reshape, rebuild things. And I think it's important that you understand which position you're in as a
mm,
buyer in comparison to your supplier. And then obviously think outside of the box on, okay, how can I use this to put my company into a better position? And it's not always within the framework that is given to you, but it's often outside of that framework and you try to rebuild it. But of course, in a day to day, a sense for numbers and most of all, a sense for people doesn't hurt. Taking apart all the Excel spreadsheets and the tickets and the POs. Luckily, procurement is still very much a people business.
mm.
And I think it's just so important to have a good relationship both with your internal stakeholders, but also your vendors. You can fight and you can discuss about deals and issues, but you don't have to fight with the person.
Mm.
You can still relate to people. And I think that brings you forward way further than just running some numbers in some spreadsheet.
Yeah, be tough on the issues and not on the person, isn't it? That's usually the.
Exactly.
How do you learn and develop yourself?
Mostly by connecting with other procurement professionals, right? I'm on a podcast, so obviously I love talking about procurement. I love talking to other procurement professionals about their experiences, how they approach challenges, how they do things, whether it's processes, whether it's negotiations, whether it's also dealing maybe with some internal challenges, right? So I love connecting with people. I always offer my input to people, not only because I want to help them. I think every procurement person has a helpless syndrome, but also because whenever connect with people, I just learn so much also by talking to them. And it's something that sticks with me for a long while after speaking to people. And other than that, there's always some good old online learning opportunities. But I think generally just staying on top of what's new, what's up and coming, and what will be relevant for procurement.
Definitely, I think that one of the traits of procurement people is that they're very curious. So you see them, especially within an organization, you're looking around and you discover these opportunities, or you go down a bit of a rabbit hole and you find out how something works. And I think it's the same in the marketplace. You can learn a lot about how various markets work, supply markets, supply chains, all that sort of stuff. It's one of those things that you can quite easily find a lot about. There's a lot on, especially over the last few years, there's been a lot put out about all the different topics that are useful for a procurement person, really.
The challenges that procurement had to face in the past few years. But I think it's maybe the one positive thing coming out of pandemic and whatnot for procurement, that you have an abundance of resources now to tap into, because the importance of our functions, or the importance of our function, was really put into the spotlight. But at the same time, I think also people value our function more. So I think naturally there will be a lot more of a market building around procurement, which we see both in learning, but also in tools. I think every week you can now go on LinkedIn and you'll see one or another procurement SaaS popping up. So it's interesting. It's an interesting time to be in procurement.
Definitely. What are you most proud of?
I think whenever I'm most proud is when I see that our stakeholders actively reach out to us for
Mm,
support, right? I think that's the biggest achievement that a procurement team can have, if they're perceived more as a partner and a trusted co-pilot rather than being that gatekeeper function. When you enable people to also make that mindset switch of, oh, no, I have to go to procurement, otherwise this won't get through, to, okay, I have this idea and I want to double check it with procurement, and I need them. I want them to be on this because I value their support and I know I'm in very good hands. I think something that we achieved here, and I think that's something I'm very proud of. And I think another note, and I think this might be overlooked in procurement quite often because we're just so outward looking. We're looking at our company, we're looking at our suppliers, but I think I pride myself with creating an atmosphere of absolute trust in my team. So I think there are no taboos, there are no boundaries in my team to feedback we're giving, but also everybody knows their responsibility. Everybody speaks up and feels very comfortable to speak up. And sometimes also with very strong opinions, right? And I think the fact that no one holds back in the team is something that, apart from being a procurement professional, also as a leader, I'm quite proud of.
Brilliant. Yeah. You mentioned there about stakeholders approaching you. How would you say you fostered that sense of engagement from your stakeholder base?
So I think very early on, it was clear for me and the team that being in a tech company, being around a pretty young workforce, you have to approach them and be available for them where they are in their normal environment, so to speak, right? So really integrate your processes with what is there. For example, like the instant messengers you have in the company or the usual ticket board. So we actively opted against implementing a huge procurement solution that could not tap into this because we felt that in a time where everybody can go on Amazon and essentially buy everything within a minute. Like the last car, I bought it in 5 minutes online. So I think you have to cater to that, right?
Mm,
You can't expect people that are not in procurement or not in finance to go out of their way and then straight away be super comfortable with going yet onto another platform, filling out a lot of documents and whatnot to finally get what they need to do their jobs. So I think we established this in the first place by being available where they are anyways, so they can reach out to us essentially instantly. And then, of course, offering something like a full service procurement is what we call it. So we expect very little input from our stakeholders because we feel we were hired to do this, right? We were hired to be aware of risk, to be aware of clauses and contracts, to be aware of what's going on. But we don't expect somebody engineering for a living, doing marketing for a living, to be at the same level of information at all time as we are. So we
mm.
try to make it as lean and as simple as possible. And I think this resonates a lot with the team. I think that was the magic key for us.
What would you say is your period of greatest growth?
So I think when I first became a procurement leader, so I became a procurement leader quite rather quickly after I actually started my career in procurement. It was actually 2 years after I started my procurement journey that I became a procurement leader more by accident, I think. But I think that was tricky because I was catapulted into this position quite young in my mid 20s, essentially. And I had to learn to lead a team and a very experienced team of experienced procurement experts, while also learning quite a bit about procurement itself at the same time, right? So it weren't always the easiest days, I feel. Lots of hours worked, quite a few hours slept, unfortunately, but I think I grew a lot, right? But I also, maybe they're listening, but I also have to give it to the team back then that really made it easy for me to ease into that role. So I think they made it easy. They bared with me on this. But I think I grew a lot in that period.
Great. Looking ahead, where do you see procurement going?
Less operational for sure. I think procurement still spends way too much time on very transactional tasks, like writing up reports, drafting contracts, drafting POs. I know a lot of companies have this automated already. We do too, but being on procurement events quite frequently, I think to me at least, it's always funny when I in the audience and I hear these procurement teams talking about the blockchain, talking about generative AI and whatnot. While I'm pretty certain that a majority of procurement, the same as the majority of the world, still runs on Excel, right?
Yeah.
So I think the first step for procurement is not building a rocket ship and flying into the future, but it's really just entering or reaching 2024, right? And I think you don't need to go from spreadsheets to supercomputing, but building automations, building proper workflows, building proper contract management, it doesn't require a very hands-on approach, but rather is fully automated. That goes a long way, right? There are no magic shortcuts, so you won't go from your spreadsheet to quantum computing. There are a few steps in between. So for my team, probably continuing the path of automation. We're a very small team, so we really try to be as hands off as possible in the operational bit. So we're really building a strong automation backend, slowly but steadily creeping into the generative AI function. But truth be told, I think for us also, we're at the beginning of our journey when it comes to really be up to speed with AI. So for us, it's the automation game, which I think is the biggest lever for procurement at the moment.
Yeah. And it's making sure we automate the right things, isn't it? Because you could automate. There's probably, as you say, there's things that we do we shouldn't even really be doing anymore. It's, yeah, that we want to be automating the right things rather than.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think there's also one thing that a lot of people forget when they're talking automation, but also when they're talking AI, essentially, right? And it's getting proper data in place. I think every procurement team has to be a data team as well, right? Because
Mm.
if you're not able to get a hold on clean data and have a source of truth that you can trust and tap into, you can automate and you can train models all you want, but in the end, it will be utter chaos. So I think for every team that's looking into innovating, I think the first step should be cleaning up your mess and then really start with a clean sheet of data and data input sources.
Where would you like to see your career go next?
I think I see myself, and I really love being at and those fast-paced companies because
Mm.
I see myself as a builder, not with my hands. There are a lot of people that will confirm that I'm a horrible craftsman. But I think as long as it's digital and it's really about building up proper procurement, building up also modern procurement teams, fast-paced procurement teams, that's the part that I enjoy most. So really building up procurement the most efficient way and really trying to keep up with all the technology and trying to put all these pieces in place to really have a state of the art procurement. That's something where I see myself and also see myself going forward. Luckily, at Personio, the innovation never stops. So I think there won't be a boring day for a long time. Yeah, I think what I'm doing right now is really what I like and really what I will continue to do. But I think the challenges will only get bigger. So I think I'm in a fairly good place and hopefully can also help procurement as a whole to really get there someday.
What advice would you give to someone who's considering a career in procurement?
I mean, I'm heavily biased because I started in small and very agile teams, but I feel that this is also a great place to start because the level of, I would call it positive chaos and the diversity of challenges and learnings. I think it's something that you will have a hard time finding at those behemoth of a large procurement company where you function, where you have a really specific focus area or expertise, right? So there's something very there's something very interesting about going to work in the morning, working on a SaaS contract, and doing a marketing contract after that, and doing a headhunter agency or a rental contract after
Mm.
that, right? I think these are learnings that you will only get in smaller companies. There's nothing wrong, obviously, about working at large organizations. My heavily biased advice again is start at a small company, even though it will be stressful. It will be way more challenging, but I think you will learn just so much more.
Yeah, I'd really agree with that. So my first role was a very small organization. I did headed up procurement and logistics for them, and part of that sort of sat in a finance team. So there was one person on accounts payable, one person on accounts receivable, uh, management accountant, and you could if you needed a load of money coming in, everyone got on the phones and rang up customers and did the accounts receivable piece. And sometimes you'd field calls from the accounts payable, and it was, you really get to understand how a business actually works and how all those different business functions work. And then obviously you just have to bear in mind when you work at a bigger organization, it's scaled up and you don't really get access to that. You've got 50 people in accounts payable rather than one person in accounts payable. It's just like a bigger version of that thing that you've worked in before. So yeah, it's really interesting perspective.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly like you said. You will walk out of that role at some point and you will know just as much about how an accounting team functions, how an FP&A team functions as about how a procurement team functions. So I think, and going forward, even if you're stuck in procurement, that knowledge is just so valuable because procurement in the end, it's all about making organizations more efficient. So if how things work also downstream from your role, I think it adds to the bigger picture, right? And it just makes you a better procurement manager.
Yeah. How can we get more young people into procurement?
I think procurement needs to become more visible, right? Whenever you speak to people, you will always hear, how did you get a procurement? And 99.9% the answer will be by accident, right? Most people don't really know that procurement even exists until they hear about it in some class in university. So I think it's really about becoming more visible. I think one great step forward would be more connected within procurement. I think there's some really great communities around procurement out there, um, but I feel that they're not visible enough on their prominent platforms out there. So I think that would be probably step one, and step two. The thing that I missed once I picked up an interest in procurement was really procurement in academia. Right, there are
Okay.
so many fields that you can study, but there are very few dedicated supply chain or procurement paths. And I think it's becoming more and more important going forward. So I think that's maybe something to lobby for or to push for to really be more prominent at the beginning of people's career, right?
Yeah.
So don't have them stumble into that role and then learn to swim while they're at it, but prepare them for what they need to know, what to expect of them, and then have really great educated people joining the teams.
You mentioned there about some of the communities not being so visible. Are there any that you'd like to give a shout out to?
Yeah. So for me, the one that I made the greatest connection in is the Procurement Foundry.
Hmm.
I think that's a great bunch of procurement professionals from all across the world, really being really helpful. So I had so many great discussions, been to an event in Chicago, been there as a speaker. So it's really helpful because whatever you put out there, you can be sure that somebody picks it up, and you might not get exactly what you want when you put it out there, but you get something. It's always insightful, and it's always great time spent talking to these other members. I would definitely, so big shout out to the community, and also, yeah, great that these communities exist.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for joining us today, Nils. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening. Do like and share and subscribe to hear the next procurement conversation.